During a fishing trip in the middle of the night, Eddie and his friends feel something attacking their boat, and suddenly one of them is dragged into the water. A few seconds later, Blaine manages to return to the surface and swims towards the boat, but ends up being pulled back to the bottom and his friends are unable to save him. Just then, the branches of the trees begin to stretch out and grow underwater. Seeing those trunks approaching the boat, Eddie throws an explosive into the lake and manages to destroy them. However, on the other side, other branches emerge from the swamp and lift the boat, hitting Eddie's body and knocking the pilot into the water. While his friend is being attacked, Coyle takes the opportunity to swim to the shore and tries to escape, but ends up being surrounded by branches. 2 days after the attack, Susie begins to feel ill in class and is helped by her teacher after fainting. Meanwhile, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Abby helps rescue 2 children and is about to carry out some tests on the girl who has a very serious fever. However, Harlan shows up and reveals that the doctor has been summoned to return to the United States because there is an outbreak in a region of Louisiana. The next day, Abby meets Susie and finds a tree branch full of goo on her pillow. While one of the doctors analyzes the sample to find out where it came from, Abby goes to find the girl's relatives and discovers that her mother is no longer alive and her father is missing. As his boat is not at the dock, everything indicates that the man is in the water, so the doctor decides to go to Susie's house to investigate. When she gets there, she meets an old boyfriend, who is now the town sheriff, and discovers that Coyle, the girl's father, is a fisherman. According to Matt, the man has been arrested a few times for illegal fishing, and Abby goes into the house to check if Coyle is back yet. While looking for clues as to what might have caused Susie's illness, the doctor hears a suspicious sound and notices a kind of plant growing on the wall. Following the tracks left along the way, Matt and Abby find Alec and the man shows him the body of Mr. Coyle, which is mummified in the bathroom. Apparently, the man was infected by some pathogen that took over his body from the inside out and soon eliminated it. According to Alec, he was hired to collect and analyze samples from the swamp and believes that they may be linked to that infection. After saying this, the man manages to convince Abby to accompany him to his hut and introduces her to his dog, Garo. The biologist tells that the place has been adapted to function as a research laboratory and reveals that he is about to identify a new mutagen buried at the bottom of the swamp. After dripping a sample of the material he collected that morning onto a handful of moss, Alec shows that the plant begins to grow indefinitely and takes up all the available space. When he realizes that the glass is about to explode, the scientist uses nitrogen to destroy the plants and stop them growing. At that moment, Abby realizes that this mutagen could be the cause of Susie's illness and returns to the hospital to do the analysis on Mr. Coyle's body. After taking some plant samples from the man's body, the doctor asks Alec to carry out new tests, and they are both distracted by the microscope images while the plants inside Coyle's body begin to grow. The branches quickly spread across the room and Abby only realizes what is happening when the body rises. At this point, the woman screams and Alec starts looking for a safe way out so that they don't get infected. Suddenly, Susie, who had completely blacked out, regained consciousness and removed the devices from her body. The girl arrives at the laboratory and sees Abby being dragged by the branches that are clinging to her leg, but Alec manages to save her. Seeing her father's condition, the girl despairs and faints. When she realizes that Susie is in danger, the doctor rushes to her rescue while using the flammable substances she finds in the laboratory to set the monster on fire. As soon as the plants are eliminated, he uses a fire extinguisher to put out the flames and Abby manages to revive the girl. That night, Abby and Alec go to the place where Coyle and his companions went fishing and find their boat destroyed. While investigating the boat, the pair find a bag containing a laptop and a briefcase with a pair of syringes. At that moment, Alec realizes that Coyle and his friends didn't go there to fish and decides to take that substance to be analyzed in the laboratory. At the end of the analysis, the scientist discovers that the liquid is a biological accelerant like the one taken from the swamp, but stronger. This indicates that someone is spreading the substance in the marsh and causing the disease, so Alec decides to follow the GPS locations of the laptop he found in order to recover the suitcases that were thrown into the water. However, during the mission, he comes across a hooded man and ends up being shot twice. The guy then drops a bomb on Alec's boat and the scientist has to jump into the water seconds before it explodes. When she realizes what has just happened, Abby immediately goes to meet her partner and Alec's body begins to be wrapped by the branches, which drag him underwater. When she arrives at the scene of the explosion, Abby desperately tries to find Alec, but her boat is attacked and she falls into the swamp. During her escape, the doctor finds the body of another man trapped among the twisted logs and sees a monster coming out of the water. Terrified, she tries to escape and doesn't even realize that the creature is Alec himself. A few minutes after escaping alive from that swamp, Abby returns with Matt and a search team to look for the biologist. Frightened, Alec runs away and, when he tries to remove all the moss from the surface of his body, he discovers that there is nothing underneath that cluster of cells, because he has been transformed into the swamp monster. The next morning, Harlan discovers that Susie has escaped from the hospital and calls the police to help look for her. Meanwhile, Abby enlists the help of her friend Liz to find Daniel, Alec's old roommate. Now that the biologist is gone, Daniel is looking after Garo and shows the doctor Alec's computer. In this way, Abby manages to access some of the scientist's old videos and discovers that he was beginning to fall in love with her. At this point, the doctor becomes emotional, but is interrupted by a message from her coworker who reveals that Susie has disappeared. Concerned about the residents of his town, Avery calls Dr. Caroline and Dr. Jason to his house to explain the biological accelerator they have created. The man hired scientists to develop a substance capable of making trees grow faster in order to drain the water. In addition, the businessman intended to sell these plants to pharmaceutical and cosmetics companies. However, after the accelerator was used, some of the town's residents fell ill and Avery demands an explanation as to what happened. When confronted, Jason says that the substance he created can't be responsible for making people ill and assures them that it was all just a coincidence. However, when pressed, the scientist states that he will investigate the origin of the pathogen and Avery advises him to resolve the situation as soon as possible. Otherwise, the police will get to them soon. At dusk, Susie hitches a ride on a police boat to get to the swamp and Robbie sees two men in a boat collecting something from the water. When he approaches to carry out an investigation, the policeman ends up being attacked by Landro, who eliminates him with a harpoon. In an attempt to get rid of the evidence of the crime, Landro decides to sink the boat, at which point the swamp monster wakes up from his deep sleep. While the man throws Robbie's body into the water, Susie manages to escape from the boat and makes her way through the forest. Immediately, the criminal grabs a machete to go after her and, soon after, Abby and Matt find the boat. Seeing Susie's shoes next to the policeman's body, the doctor realizes that the girl was on that boat and orders Matt to go after her. But as soon as the man walks away, Abby hears the girl's screams and goes to meet her. Just as Landro is about to catch up with Susie, the swamp monster appears and captures the criminal. At that moment, the man picks up a knife to hit him, but the creature manages to regenerate and, as soon as his wounds are healed, he uses the swamp moss to eliminate his enemy. In a few seconds, Landro's body is destroyed by the plants and Susie is paralyzed at the sight of the monster that saved her. Then Abby shows up to rescue the girl and is terrified to see the swamp monster again. After catching Susie, the doctor escapes and runs into Matt, then realizes that the creature has disappeared. On the way back to the hospital, the girl reveals that she talked to the swamp monster before Abby showed up and he introduced himself as Alec. During the early hours of the morning, Landro's body is surrounded by a huge number of insects that begin to put the pieces together to form a new body. The next day, when she arrives at the hospital, the doctor discovers that Harlan has been contaminated and is ill, so she decides to break into Alec's laboratory in search of any clues that might help her find a cure. Meanwhile, in the forest, a hunter hears the sound of a frightened animal and goes after it. At this point, he comes across Landro's body and is attacked by the insects that come out of his body. After searching every corner of the cabin, Abby finds the notebook where Alec documented all his research and, while reading it, she is attacked by thousands of insects that surround the cabin. Suddenly, Landro bursts through the window and approaches the doctor. As Abby tries to push him away, the swamp monster appears and strikes his enemy. The creature then approaches and frees Landro's soul. At this point, Abby tries to communicate with the creature and realizes that it is in fact talking to Alec. With his help, the doctor discovers a possible cure for the disease and tests her theory on Harlan. Thanks to her, the man manages to stabilize and wakes up, so the medical team establishes the same treatment protocol for all the other patients. A few days later, Abby climbs into a boat and returns to the swamp to talk to Alec. Her goal is to get a tissue sample to try and find a way to bring her friend back. After taking the sample, the woman returned to the hospital and enlisted the help of Jason, a botanist, to continue her research. That day, Abby decides to pay a visit to her friend and, when she arrives at Liz's father's restaurant, she discovers that Todd, one of the employees, was hallucinating and ended up hurting himself. Suddenly, Delroy starts acting strangely and is tormented by visions of the past. Unable to distinguish reality, the man grabs his shotgun and starts shooting everywhere. Just then, Lucilia appears and orders him to put the gun down. As soon as the man calms down, the policewoman manages to stop him and Abby uses a tranquilizer to immobilize Delroy. During the fight, Lucilia ends up getting a scratch, but is not seriously injured. In search of answers about what is going on, Abby again goes after Alec and finds a body in the middle of the forest. While she's investigating, Alec appears and informs her that Todd was there last night. Everything indicates that the young man was contaminated by a pathogen that was dormant in that mummified tissue and passed the disease on to Delroy. At that moment, the doctor realizes that Lucilia may also have been infected and decides to go after her. That night, Avery and his wife throw a party to celebrate the healing of the hospitalized patients and, during the event, Lucilia has a vision of her son being eliminated. Desperate, the policewoman draws her gun and threatens to shoot, so Abby approaches her to try to calm her down and ends up being infected. When Matt shows up, Lucilia finally calms down and the doctor drives quickly back to the marsh before being affected by the symptoms. However, when she gets there, Abby begins to create a scenario in her mind where she is being captured and feels like she can't breathe. Sensing his friend's desperation, Alec uses his powers to remove the substance from her body and ends up poisoning himself. Quickly, the creature runs to the body it saw in the forest and pours the substance back into the mummified body. That night, Maria goes to Susie's room to see if the girl needs anything, as she has just left the hospital and moved in with Avery. Years ago, the woman lost her daughter in an accident and Susie begins to have nightmares about Shauna. That night, the spirit of the perished girl invades the girl's body and takes up residence in it, as this is Shauna's way of returning home. Despite gaining superpowers, Alec has also been suffering from hallucinations and sees human bodies scattered throughout the forest. One night, the swamp monster sees a man approaching in a boat and starts talking to the pilot, who apparently isn't afraid of him. However, a short time later, Alec realizes that the guy is just a ghost who is there to warn him of a danger from the past that is coming back. 14 years ago, Abby saw her best friend, Shauna, disappear after falling off a bridge and Maria always blamed her for the loss of her daughter. The next morning, the doctor receives a call from Susie and decides to go and find her. As soon as she enters the girl's room, Abby notices that she is acting strangely and decides to examine her. At this point, she realizes that Susie's body has been taken over by Shauna and discovers that her old friend has returned seeking revenge because Abby was unable to save her. On leaving the mansion, the doctor meets Madame Xanadu and discovers that Shauna's spirit has been corrupted by the darkness. Now that she's back, the young woman doesn't intend to stop acting until her revenge is complete and, to that end, Shauna intends to convince her mother to join her. Even though she was afraid of being manipulated by Susie, Maria entered the icy waters of the swamp and went to find her daughter. Seeing the woman's car stopped on the road, Abby realizes that she is nearby and gets out of the vehicle to look for her. Just then, Susie appears and the doctor realizes that she is no longer possessed. With the girl's help, Abby manages to find Maria in time, but instead of listening to her, the woman tries to eliminate her underwater. However, Abby manages to shake off the attack and swims back to shore. In the meantime, Shauna appears and drags her mother underwater. Desperate, the doctor dives in search of Maria, but can't find her. Suddenly, the swamp monster appears with the woman in his arms and the doctor manages to bring her back. At that moment, Alec reveals that the trees showed him what happened 14 years ago, when Shauna tried to convince Abby to jump off the bridge with her. The two friends were finishing high school and wanted to do something crazy before going to college. Despite being scared, Abby decided to jump into the lake with her best friend and pushed Shauna off the bridge, as she intended to jump in after her. However, when she realized that her friend had not returned to the surface, the girl became desperate and jumped into the water to look for her. Soon after, Shauna appeared, having dived in to scare her friend. But before they could get out of the water, Shauna felt something grab her leg and she was dragged to the bottom of the lake. Suddenly, Matt appears and the swamp monster hides while Abby and Maria are taken back to the city. After analyzing the sample provided by the doctor, Jason discovers that the tissue belongs to a living creature and warns Avery, who sends a group of hunters to capture the swamp monster. However, caught in an ambush, Alec manages to escape and chases his enemies through the forest. Even though they were wounded, the hunters manage to reach the boat and escape the swamp alive. Minutes later, the pair arrive at the hospital and, when they discover that they have been attacked by the swamp monster, Abby decides to go and talk to Alec to find out what has happened. Meanwhile, Lucilia has a private conversation with her son and discovers that it was he who eliminated Alec on Avery's orders. The scientist was about to find out about the experiments Avery was doing in the swamp with Jason's help, so he had to be silenced. After being blackmailed with concrete evidence of crimes his mother had committed, Matt decided to do the dirty work to protect her and eliminated Alec in the swamp. When she finds her friend, Abby discovers the real reason for the attack and realizes that he is being stalked. During the conversation, they both notice two policemen approaching and Alec runs off. Seeing the footprints on the ground, Matt grabs a shotgun and goes after the monster, but finds only Abby. Suddenly, Alec appears and attacks the policeman, but the doctor manages to intervene and save Matt's life. When he realizes that the monster doesn't know the identity of the man who shot him, Matt decides to help Abby cover for him, and Alec comes to see the policeman as an ally. However, upon returning to the police station, Matt tells his mother that Alec is still alive, and Lucilia goes to Avery's house to break the news. When he discovers that the scientist survived the attack, the businessman decides to go after him, and Lucilia accompanies him to ensure that this time the mission is a success. However, when he arrives at the swamp, Avery takes out his gun and threatens to shoot the sheriff, believing that the woman has lured him there to eliminate him. The man isn't convinced that Alec really survived. His guess is that Lucilia was furious when she learned that her son had been involved in that mess and went after revenge. However, just as the man was about to shoot, Matt appears and strikes him. After putting him out, Matt helps his mother take Avery to the water, so that it will be easier to get rid of any evidence of the crime. However, when everyone is on the boat and Matt is about to shoot, Avery reveals that he is his father, and the policeman rebels against his mother, who has hidden the truth for all these years. While the pair argue, Avery grabs a knife and strikes Matt to give himself a chance to escape, but ends up being hit by a shot fired by Lucilia and jumps into the water. When she realizes that her son is seriously injured, the sheriff quickly takes him to Maria's house, because she knows that she will have problems explaining the origin of the wound at the hospital. While Fred tends to the policeman's wound, Lucilia talks to Maria in private and assures her that her husband has been eliminated. From the start, the two made a deal to get rid of Avery, as Maria wanted to keep his company. What none of them realize is that, after all he's been through, the businessman is still alive and determined to get his revenge. In the morning, while walking through the forest in an attempt to get home, Avery begins to hallucinate and has a vision of Lucilia. However, instead of eliminating him, the woman turns into a monster made of moss, and the businessman tries to escape, but soon realizes that what he has just seen was not real. Meanwhile, Abby is engaged in her research to find a way to bring Alec back, and decides to share this information with Harlan, as she knows he is the only person who will believe what she has to say. After seeing a tree coming out of a body, the doctor knows that anything is possible in that place and says he will support her in her research. However, that night, while walking home, Harlan is captured by two men who put him in a vehicle and take him away. After being tormented by memories of the day his father lost his life in that swamp, Avery comes across Alec and is taken to his cabin. When he wakes up, the man discovers that Lucilia was telling the truth, because the scientist really is alive. According to Alec, the swamp created him so that balance could be restored. To do this, the monster must protect the place from people like Avery, who only know how to take advantage of everything they touch. When he realizes that his life is at risk, the man decides to make a deal with Alec and says that he will help him become human again. He claims that Dr. Jason is capable of finding a way to reverse the transformation, so Swamp Thing decides to let him go. The next morning, when she arrives at the office, Abby sees Palomar, and the doctor tells her that Harlan has been called in to contain an outbreak of dengue fever in Bangladesh. At this point, the doctor is taken to a meeting with Nathan Ellery, who is there to try to convince her to reveal Alec's location. However, Abby refuses to reveal any information and tries to contact Harlan to find out if he is all right, but gets no reply. When she finally makes it back to town, Avery goes to meet Jason to tell him what happened and asks if the doctor can undo Alec's transformation. However, instead of curing him, Jason convinces the businessman that Alec is much more useful to them as a monster, so that he can serve as a guinea pig for various experiments. So, that night, the pair set up an ambush to capture Alec and manage to immobilize him with the help of nitrogen. Hours later, Abby shows up to warn her friend that he is in danger, but realizes that Alec has been taken. Arriving at the makeshift laboratory built by Avery, Alec has his body destroyed and Jason removes his parts while he is awake, feeling absolutely everything. When he realizes that Alec's organs are no longer working, the doctor understands that he is no longer a man, but a plant that thinks it is human, because it still has all the memories and personality of its host. That night, Abby and Liz break into the facility and end up being surrounded by armed guards. Just as the men are about to shoot, a blue creature appears and attacks them. Hearing the screams of the security guards, Jason takes the vital parts he stole from Alec and runs off, leaving the specimen behind. After eliminating all of Abby's enemies, Daniel, who turned into the Blue Devil to save her, leaves and the doctor continues her search for the swamp monster. When she finally manages to find him, Abby frees him and turns off the green light that was being used to prevent Alec from regenerating. At this point, his body recovers and he returns to the swamp. Worried about her friend, Abby decides to go after him and discovers that the body of the real Alec Holland has been at the bottom of the lake all this time. Now that he knows he can never be human again, Alec decides to get rid of those who hurt him and attacks Nathan's team. The man invaded the swamp in an attempt to capture the creature, but the swamp monster was already waiting for him. After eliminating his first victim, Alec creates a trap to attract the rest of the team and uses tree trunks to attack them. When they see the swamp monster approaching, the survivors decide to flee and leave Nathan alone with the creature. But instead of eliminating him, Alec just intimidates his enemy and orders him to stay far away from that swamp. In an attempt to cure his wife, who is in an advanced stage of the disease, Jason prepares a dinner with the vital parts he collected from Alec and decides to try the dish he prepared before feeding Caroline. However, after the first bite, Jason begins to suffer strong side effects and begins his transformation. When he gets up, he realizes that he is no longer the same, because now he feels much more connected to nature. However, just as he is about to force Caroline to eat that meal, the police show up and the doctor is arrested. That night, after securing Jason's arrest, Abby goes to the cabin looking for Alec and says that even though she knows she can't bring him back, she won't abandon him. Hours later, when he arrives at the police station, Matt finds the place completely destroyed and full of plants. During the investigation, he sees Tyler's body lying on the ground and comes across a creature very similar to the swamp monster. When asked about his true identity, the monster reveals that, until a few hours ago, he used to be Dr. Jason, but now he's something much more powerful. So what did you think of this series? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more series recaps. See you next time.